Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for tuning in today on today's episode of the Teams for Business podcast. I'm your host, Jack.
I'm Ivan.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm Jackie.
Today, we'll be talking about the recent NFL season and giving our playoff predictions. The 2023 to 24 NFL season was unlike any other in many different ways, and we will be diving into some of these trends that we saw and what they will mean for the teams from a football standpoint and from a business angle. Before we dive into the trends, let's hear from everybody here about their take on the NFL regular season. What teams did you guys support and how did they do this year?
Yeah, I
Oh,
can start off first.
okay.
Oh, okay, no. So yeah, I don't really watch football, but I think this year, I've been seeing a lot on social media, and since, I'm not really that into it, but I definitely support the 49ers because they're doing well. They're doing well at being first in the, what was it, the AFC or I forgot, but
NFC.
NFC, yeah. So they're first, and I think they get a bye around in the playoffs. So I think that's good. But I they did really well. But I think in one game they choked against the Ravens, and that was very on social media. That was a very interesting thing to see. But yeah, I'm definitely proud of the 49ers for doing so well and making up for the Warriors.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so I wish my season went as well as the 49ers did. So I like the Bengals. And we got off to a pretty rough start. And then it's basically like Joe Burrow, and then like there's just a lot of injuries. And then when Joe Burrow got healthy for like, I don't know, a few games in the middle, it was like good, great, we were winning. Um, and then he got injured again. So our season kind of went downhill from there. But we had our backup quarterback, which I know we'll be talking a little bit about, but he went in for a little bit, won actually a few games, pretty impressive, but then it wasn't great. But also like if he won respectfully, I don't think a lot of fans thought that he would even be able to make it far in the playoffs anyway. So it's just like, yeah. But yeah, I think that it was really interesting to look at because the Bengals did not make the playoffs. And keep in mind, this is like a team since like Joe Burrow's been on, like starting from his second year, I think. Like we've always been making like AFC championships, like Super Bowls, like that's kind of like the caliber that everyone expected. So not making the playoffs, but like it was also without Joe Burrow. So like it wasn't too unexpected, but at the same time, it was like, wow, like what happened here?
Yeah, I think it was rough for the Bengals because I mean they ended like 9-8 or something, right? And I think the Buccaneers were also 9-8, but they were like first in the division, so they were fourth and they made the playoffs. So it's all relative to like your division. But yeah, I mean I support the Niners from the Bay Area, so yeah, we're doing good. I think we're definitely the best in the NFC. We'll see what happens. Hopefully we get to the Super Bowl and then we can beat whoever comes out in the AFC. But yeah, we're doing good so far.
Yeah, I'm on the unluckier side of that. I'm riding the Bears, and that's my local team, so I obviously support them. And over the past few years, they've been dealing with a little bit of mediocrity, but s- this year I feel like we have improved a lot, especially in the second half when Justin Fields came back. But obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback position, as the Bears do have the number one pick, and they could select two or three of the upcoming quarterbacks that are in the 2024 draft, which is pretty loaded with talent. So. Speaking of quarterbacks, the first talking point we're going to talk about is backup quarterbacks. And this situation was pretty much foreshadowed by Aaron Rodgers being out for the season on the first play of the Jets' opening game against the Bills. And we later also saw Jackie's favorite player, Bengals Joe Burrow, also go down with a season-ending injury. And other notable names that also went down for the year include Browns' Deshaun Watson, Colts rookie Anthony Richardson, Steelers sophomore Kenny Pickett, and Giants Daniel Jones. And most of the teams that lost their starting quarterback for the season struggled and missed the playoffs, aside from Joe Flacco in the Browns and whoever's the quarterback for the Steelers. And so, what could this mean for teams in the NFL offseason? And what predictions do you have for the salaries of these backup quarterbacks that will be signed from free agency?
I think looking at like salaries is always like very interesting. Especially because like for quarterbacks, I think one big trend to like mention is that like I think like whenever a new contract gets like signed, especially like the big players like Joe Burrow, like this season or like right before, had like his like big contract done. And it was like I think like the biggest one, like for like the highest paid um player in the NFL. But like that's like I think every time a good quarterback gets like signed, it kind of like resets a little bit, like Lamar Jackson signing too. And I think like depending on for salary, like it's kind of gonna be really dependent on like kind of how I don't know how to phrase this, but it's like kind of like depending on how the market goes. Because if they were signed like, for example, like last year, like last off season or like two off seasons ago, like the number would have been so much more different and like probably lower. But like because of the fact that like every single signing, like it just gets like pushed higher and higher. I think that definitely does have like an impact on what it means for them. And then also I think it's like teams like kind of live and learn from like other teams' experience, because there have been like a lot of big names that have been signed and then just flopped a little bit. Like for example, like not flopped, but just like didn't live up to expectations. Like for example, as you said, like Aaron Rodgers, like he played like 4 snaps and then went down. Like obviously not his fault, and like I'm sure he wouldn't want to be injured either. But like at the same time, like from the Jets' perspective, it's like, wow, we spent this much money on you and you get injured like 4 snaps in. Or like someone else like Deshaun Watson, I think, or like just other people in general, like once they get like you know, like come to a team like spend so much money and then it's like, wow, like was this really worth it? So I think like a lot of those like success versus failure stories are just like teams could be wary of them in the future.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think the Jets' point is, I think most notably, like with Aaron Rodgers going down, I think the thing is that they didn't have a backup quarterback. They had to rely on Zach Wilson, and their whole season just went to, yeah, it was pretty much over from the moment that first game ended. So I think a notable trend is probably, I think this year there was like a record number of starting quarterbacks going down. So I think teams are going to start prioritizing like paying up for some like solid backup quarterbacks because they don't want to see that right now. And I think backup quarterback salaries are ranging from like I think 2 to 8 million, somewhere in that range. I can see that continue to climb up. I think that's especially because yeah, after everything we saw this year, I think more than like around 10 starting quarterbacks just going down, maybe like in the first couple weeks of the season, we already had like a couple. So it's just guaranteeing that your season doesn't go to waste, even if a starter does go down. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like the only example I can think of is like Brock Purdy because that's probably the only team I follow. But I think like having a solid backup and the backup to the backup is very valuable to be to like NFL teams because I think there's been many instances when you have your starting quarterback go down and then also your backup quarterback go down in like the same game. So I think it's like I think a lot of teams might probably are considering to have like having a solid backup and a backup quarterback, and I think it's also a better financial move because like I think if you have a backup quarterback, you're able to get away with paying them a little bit less, rather than spending millions of dollars on one person who might be a bust, as you put it as your starter, while you have like other people like backups who probably really want to get on the field and not taking anything for granted, and you get away with paying them a little less. So I think it's a little bit more worth it to have a bit of a solid and hardworking backups as opposed to like a starter who is, maybe be like a first draft pick, but then suddenly taking everything for granted and then becoming a bust.
Yeah, I definitely agree. When Ivan mentioned that, I just thought of the 49ers like recent like I think it was like 2022 to 23 season where they had big quarterback struggles where Trey Lance went down really early, Garoppolo then went down early, and then that paved the way for Brock Purdy to rise up. So that is definitely like a very like valid choice. I think another path that could happen with some teams is that they could look into the draft and draft some quarterbacks in the later round. And that worked well for the 49ers, and in some way the Commanders like Sam Howell was okay until the bye week, and then kind of started going downhill from there. And then as for salaries, I I think it is possible that we could see our first double digit salary for a backup quarterback this year, just because how this year, especially this year, has showed how important backup quarterbacks are. And also going off of Jackie's point, I think it will be very wise to be very stingy about signing players to big contracts. For example, I mean, or trading players for big contracts, because we saw the Broncos trade for Russell Wilson, and obviously that isn't going too well. Like, sure, he had a good comeback player of this season, like I guess campaign type thing, but like he obviously didn't like live up to like those expectations that he was going to be the player that he was at Seattle. So we could see so definitely, I think it would be wise for teams to be thinking about cap space, thinking about like there are some teams that are gonna have like big cap like hits based off of players that they might release or they might like cut contracts of, and that's obviously a big financial struggle for those teams, which like kind of strains their ability to sign like top quality players. So I think teams, obviously Jackie's point that teams have to be a little bit more stingy with negotiating contracts and signing big contract players, big name players. Those are gonna be That's gonna be very important for the future. And then next, this is a trend that has continued in this season from the past season, and this is the salaries of the running back. Despite being still important for a team's offense, the running back is a devaluing position in today's NFL, and many elite running backs, such as Jonathan Taylor of the Colts, Saquon Barkley of the Giants, and Josh Jacobs of the Raiders, were expressing concerns about this trend and their stagnating salaries. And this debate was also amplified by the 2023 NFL Draft, in which the two best-ranked running backs, Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, were drafted in the first half of the first round, which was considered very high for the position already. So, what would these trends and debates mean for the future of this position?
I guess I can start. I think it's just that like running backs inherently, I think they are the most replaceable position. Because I know running backs can go out like one season, they can go crazy, they can basically carry a team. But what that like taking that toll, what that does to their body, going into next season is going to be much harder like for them to replicate that. I think just mentioning Josh Jacobs of the Raiders, last season he had like a offensive player of the year type of campaign, but this season his efficiency metrics went down like significantly and he wasn't very good and he demanded a lot of money. I think he wanted like 10 something over $10 million. But if you just draft a running back instead of going to pay like one of these veterans for a lot of money, you could be drafting a running back for like 2 million a year. So I think that it's kind of an issue that running backs are the position that gets injured the most and they're putting their bodies on the line the most and they're also being paid less, but it's just part of the business is that they are the most replaceable position.
Yeah, I agree. I think from the research I've done, I think the running back and from like my own perspective is that the running back is definitely one of the most injury prone positions and definitely one of the positions that requires the most athleticism because you're kind of like always sometimes the smallest player on the team on the field that is on the offensive team and then like you have to rely on your like skills of like your speed and also like I think like juking abilities to like get around like massive 200 pound 6'8" linebackers trying to get you. And I think that's why the careers of these running backs are so short because like if you rely on athleticism, like you can see this in any other sport. Like if you rely on something that gets you past like a height or build, then your career is gonna be very short because like you're prone to injuries, but also as you grow older and you go past your prime, your dropout will be very significant because you're relying on like your speed and you're relying on like your abilities to not tear your ACL. And that's why I think teams are paying these people running backs very little as compared to a role on the team is because they don't want to take the risk of like I drop a couple million on a running back just for them to get injured for like 3 seasons in a row and then not do anything because that's a very high probability as opposed to any other position on the field.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that kind of just like relates to the whole thing about like running backs often aren't like very like they don't get huge massive contracts as like quarterbacks do because for example like Tom Brady he played for so many years but like a lot of running backs like they just have a shorter shelf life compared to like because like the nature of their job is essentially just like running like it's just like breaking through all these people. I'm like that's literally what they do. um and I think like also there's kind of like a really big difference between like once you get older, like someone said this, but like once you get older, like what you can do kind of just drops off. Like Joe Mixon, like on the Bengals, I think is like a pretty good example. Like he's good. Like he has definitely saved the team in like a lot of different like in a lot of different games, like a lot of different times. But at the same time, like he like hasn't been as good as he was. And so like that's definitely like one example of it. But also like you have other running backs like Christian McCaffrey, like who's doing incredibly well. And I think that kind of just like goes to show like a good player at like any position can be so important to a team. Like Christian McCaffrey, like if he was not who he is like on the Niners, like it's really hard to say like if they would even be winning so many games and like at the top of the NFC. And also like people were like, oh yeah, he should be MVP. Even like a lot of people think like MVP is like a quarterback award, but like still they were saying like, oh, like Christian McCaffrey should get MVP over like Brock Purdy or whoever. And so it definitely goes to show like a good running back can really make a difference in a team.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Although like good running backs are still like important, we could definitely see that like running backs are like most replaceable. I remember watching a video where someone said that there's like a little bit of a cycle with running backs that they draft the running back for like 4 to 5 years. If that goes well, they might like sign them, but they're also like debating potentially drafting another running back, and that cycle keeps going on and on. So you can see that like running backs, since like it looks like on the field they work so hard just to get like just a few yards and like maybe a first down or something like that, and for like some of the efforts and like the injury prone, maybe it's very risky, and that's why teams are so stingy about like doing giving running backs like a lot of money. And but I feel like another trend that we could be seeing in the future for the running back is that they could become running back slash wide receiver hybrids. And I think Christian McCaffrey in a way is a player like that, and that's why he has been so successful for the Niners. Another example is Rashad White for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's been pretty successful in a receiving role this year in addition to playing running back. So we could see the running back transforming into a more like flexible position where like it could become like another like slot wide receiver, for example. So I think that's another trend that we could see with running backs going into the future. And potentially if players do well in that role, we could see them getting a little bit more money in the future compared to like as like a pure like natural running back who just like does the running and just runs straight into like defense and like jukes the defensive players out and goes for a touchdown. Like I think that the trend will continue that those like natural running backs players salaries will stagnate, but more flexible running backs can earn a little bit more money. And then, what are some other main takeaways that we haven't mentioned yet that you found very interesting about the 2023-24 NFL season? And what are some trends that you may project to continue into future seasons?
Yeah, I can go first. I don't know if this really counts like as a trend per se, but one thing I noticed and like noticed people talking about was that like cap money. I'm not really like 100% sure on like how like NFL like how much money they can use because I know it's like not infinite. Like just because you make like a certain like number doesn't mean you can actually just spend it on your team. But there's just like cap stuff. And one thing I just wanted to mention was that like for a team on the rise, like having enough cap space like for money is like super important. Like I was looking at someone saying like about the Texans because CJ Stroud is a rookie and like rookie contracts are absolutely nothing compared to like Joe Burrow's or Patrick Mahomes' contract. And so they were saying how like the Texans are going to be like very well off in like the next few years or like at least the next season because they have a really good quarterback who's a rookie and like the rest of their team well they just won yesterday in their first playoff game. And so they're just talking about how like they have a lot of room to do well and improve and they're just definitely on the rise because they have so much space to kind of play around with and like make their team better and get like better free agents, things like that from like their cap space because a lot of the good teams right now, like for example, the Bengals, it's like a big issue of like, okay, like we have Joe Burrow, we want Chase, we want T. Higgins, like how do we keep everyone on board and then not like lose any other pieces? So like that's a big like problem for them right now. But like for the Texans, it's like CJ Stroud is a rookie, like that's so much money saved right there. And there's like a lot of other players too who aren't like as highly paid as someone else on another team is. And so I definitely think like money is actually like a pretty big consideration for like how a team will do in the future just because like how much space they have to experiment and like what they can do with like free agents and like better seasoned players.
I think that yeah, just like another takeaway would probably be like the turf fields issue that kind of came up this season. So many players went down with ACL injuries and Achilles injuries and whatnot. I think a lot of players are attributing that to difference between playing on grass fields and turf fields. Like I don't specifically know what the true difference is because I don't think I've experienced like just like running around with cleats on a turf field vs a grass field. But based on what the NFL players are saying, I mean they definitely know the difference from going from stadium to stadium, and they definitely think that playing on these turf fields poses a much higher injury risk. I think they've the NFL, like Players Association, they've been bringing it up with like the commissioner to get grass fields in every single stadium. I think that's definitely a good thing to do, just to ensure that these injuries happen less than yeah than what happened this past season, which was just like crazy amount of players going down. So yeah, I think going to grass fields is probably the best thing for the NFL.
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely the artificial turf is a really big thing, especially with the increased awareness on player safety. Because now I think there's a lot of companies trying to develop technology to like prevent brain injuries and head injuries, and then but like I don't think those have been really effective. I think most of them is placebo because I think there's one that you wear around the neck and they're like, oh, it blocks off the vessels in some way to prevent brain injuries. But I think that was also scientifically proven like false. But I think I want to also mention that there's a trend I think in NFL coaches, like with the Dolphins coach. I think he gained a lot of traction in the beginning of the season, where I think he was like relatively young and relatively less experienced as opposed to like the Patriots head coach or something who has been with the I think he's also leaving too, but like I think there's like a trend of finding younger coaches who are not as experienced in the NFL, but really experienced in coaching. And then but like the younger coaches also relate more to the players. So I think that's why the teams are opting to these younger coaches because they're probably more effective. Like a 40-30-40-year-old coach would be more effective at telling getting along better with the players rather than like a 50-60-year-old coach who is only wants results and then doesn't try to get good relationships with the players, and hence there's no team chemistry, etc. So I think that's definitely a very big change that I foresee, especially with all the coaches who have won like 20 Super Bowls in the past. Like they're like they're also getting really old, and I don't think the teams are thinking that to get rid of them because they're getting old. They're making bad decisions because they're thinking about their prime time 20 years ago, and they're just opting into a better coach who is younger.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I'm just going to add a little bit to everything that has already been said. I'm going to start with a little bit of coaching. Yeah, I definitely agree with Ivan that younger coaches are definitely going to be like we're going to see that in the future of the NFL. We already see several young coaches already being very successful. For example, the Rams, Sean McVay, who already won a Super Bowl with the Rams, and this year's Texans, D'Amico Ryan, he has been super successful with the Texans, a really good comeback story that culminated in a playoff win just yesterday as of the time of this podcast recording. So those are going to be very big trends to watch, and we see that older coaches, Pete Carroll of the Seahawks, who's 72, has just recently left his head coaching job. Bill Belichick, who's 71 and won 6 Super Bowls with Tom Brady and the Patriots, also just left just a few days ago. And we can see that those like trends, just like Ivan said, I think it would be more helpful for like teams to go like potentially like a different direction than like a coach that has already has like like a certain strategic like mindset. Like right now, we can see that Bill Belichick and the Patriots are still like pretty mediocre with drafting players from the NFL draft, and that's been like a trend that's occurred for pretty much. I'm not sure how long, but like I'd say it could potentially describe most of the Patriots era with Belichick because, well, Tom Brady was so successful. So I think Tom Brady in that way could cover up the drafting struggles from the Patriots. And just to address like another thing about the turf fields is that we have the upcoming 2026 World Cup, which is jointly hosted by the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And the FIFA who runs this World Cup, they mandate grass because grass is what soccer players play on. And in my past history, when I was a soccer player before, and I played on turf. I did not like it at all. Like I definitely felt like my ability wasn't as like good as it would be on grass, and for me at least that was an issue. So I think for NFL players that could be like a very similar thing, and we've seen an injury. we've seen like studies that prove that turf are injury rates on turf are greater than the injury rates on grass, which is obviously not a good thing. And since the 2026 World Cup is coming up, and several NFL stadiums are planning to host games there, and they're gonna have to do grass, I think it would be logical for them once they install grass to keep the grass, but then it's also consideration of like financial consideration because grass is harder to grow than turf, and as a result, it costs more. So, and then the last thing I want to touch on is obviously Jackie's point about like cap space. We've obviously seen like teams that have more flexibility with the cap space, be somewhat more successful, especially if after they're rebuilding, they get like some star players that immediately bloom to stardom, like the Texans. I mean, I think this trend could also be relatable for pretty much other like sports in the United States. For example, I think the Thunder is an example of the NBA. They have some really good they have a lot of flexibility with the cap space, and they're doing very well in the NBA right now. And another thing that I look forward to for the future of the NFL is like new state-of-the-art stadiums. We have new stadium planned for Tennessee, the Tennessee Titans, and those designs already look really cool. I think there are discussions about a new stadium in for the Washington Commanders. That is very much needed. The FedEx Field, pretty mediocre. And then, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing these new stadiums pop up for the NFL teams and how they will like attract a lot more audience and like yeah. Okay, so now we're gonna transition to I guess a little bit more fun predictions for the playoffs, and hopefully this doesn't age badly. So I'm just gonna start off by just saying that Houston has already beaten Cleveland 45-14, and we've already talked about that several times. And Kansas City also beat Miami yesterday by a score of 26-7. So with those games out of the way, what do you think is gonna happen in the playoffs?
So based on my very inexperienced self, I just want to like point out. I think I saw some clips about the Miami Dolphins versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I think like there was a huge home field advantage because like the Kansas City were definitely used to playing in colder weather than the Miami Dolphins. So I just want to point that out because I think the home field definitely will play a very big role in the playoffs. Um, like the weather because right now the weather is gonna be relatively cold. I think the Chiefs are used to colder weather rather than the Miami Dolphins who are located in Florida. But I think not much. I don't really predict much about the odds because I think the odds for the Cleveland Browns or Houston Texans. I think when I was doing research, it was predicted that the Browns would win against the Texans, but the opposite happened, and Texas actually like, blew the Browns out. I think so. Like I think the predictions for a lot of these sports are very very off, and so I think I would go with the underdog in most of these games here. I think so I think Pittsburgh Steelers versus Buffalo Bills or like some games. I think Buffalo Bills will still win. And then I think Cowboys and versus Packers. I don't really know much about the Packers, so I think I'll go with the Cowboys and then the Rams versus the Lions. I think this will be a good game, and I think probably the Lions have a good shot at beating the Rams, but we'll actually see what happened on the field because I think like a lot of games are happening where there's this first ranked team versus like the last ranked team, but then the last ranked team puts a really good fight and sometimes also wins. So that's I think a trend across all sports league in the US. So I think that will also happen in the playoffs. And I think the rankings and the predictions really don't mean anything, especially in the playoffs when everybody is there and actually playing the game instead of like, in a regular season where, not a lot is at stake. So I think we can see a lot of upsets happening in the playoffs. But in the end, I just want to say like I think the 49ers are going to reach the Super Bowl this year. They have a really good shot.
Okay, I can go next. So what's funny is that like my friend and I kind of made predictions already. And we were 2 for 2. Just want to put that out there. But also what's funny is I like was watching an Instagram Reels, or also maybe it's TikTok, I don't know. But like there's like this video of this guy who's like trying to predict it too. And he got it like very, very accurate for I think like the first game with who was it with? Oh yeah, with the Texans and the Browns. And basically he was like, oh yeah, I think CJ Stroud is gonna get 3 touchdowns and 250 yards. And then after the game, we were like, wow, that's a crazy prediction because it was very close. Um, but talking about like actual predictions, I think for the Packers versus Cowboys, I think Cowboys are gonna win. Rams and Lions, kind of like a toss up, but I'm personally rooting for the Lions on this one. And I do think that they'll win. And then Bills over Steelers, and then Philadelphia over Tampa Bay. And I think like logically it makes sense that the Eagles would win over Tampa Bay, but at the same time, like the Eagles have had some like interesting games in the middle. And then also Tampa Bay, like even though like they were first in their division, but like that's like not great. That's like the same record as the Bengals. The Bengals just like had it in like a difficult division. But unless Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield and the whole team like pulls off something, I think I'll still take the Eagles of them. But like that would be an interesting thing to see if there's like some kind of upset on that.
Yeah, I mean NFC is irrelevant because Niners just going all the way. But the AFC, I think looking at that Chiefs game, I didn't like the Chiefs like ending the regular season. I think they were struggling a lot. But then like in the playoffs, I don't know. It's like Patrick Mahomes is just he just like turns on his switch in the playoffs and whatever. Like NFL is kind of different from like other sports because it's like it's just one game determines who moves on. It's like any given Saturday, any given Sunday, anything can happen. So it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think I like Kansas City. I like Buffalo or the Ravens who have the number one seed to come out of the AFC. But yeah, it'll be fun to watch the rest of the games.
Yeah, so for me personally, I think the Lions and Rams is definitely going to be a very good game to watch. I have the Lions going over the Rams just slightly, but that could go either way. It's again, as someone said, it was a toss-up. And then I think Cowboys will go over the Packers. The Packers are the youngest team to actually make the NFL playoffs. I think for like 30 or 40, maybe 50 years. That's really impressive already for a team that was in their rebuilding stage. They had just traded Aaron Rodgers to the Jets, and they thrust Jordan Love into the quarterback position. And I don't like talking about the Packers in this play because I'm a Bears fan, but I do think that the Cowboys will win, and I think the Bills will also win over the Steelers. The Bills have been pretty hot recently, and they won out after a 6-6 record, and they actually took the division over Miami, which was pretty impressive. I really think that the Philadelphia and Tampa Bay game will be very interesting to watch, especially with how Tampa Bay has been a little bit inconsistent this year, and Philadelphia really started hot. And then at the last stage of the year, they out of the last 6 games, they lost 5 of them, and their defense has been a really big of a struggle, despite many people thinking that it would be a strength. I do, based on like ability wise and like offensive weapons and stuff like that, I think Philadelphia would go over Tampa Bay, but I think it would definitely be very interesting to watch that one. I do think the 49ers are probably going to go to the Super Bowl, and I think on the AFC side, it would be hard, but I think a Ravens v Bills matchup will be very interesting to watch. And I, even though like Kansas City has been like super dominant, I still have a lot of questions with their like offense, especially in the wide receiver position. Obviously, they had struggles with drops over this regular season, but shout out to Rashid Rice who had a big game yesterday against some Dolphins. So I think that's it for my predictions. I think we will see a 49ers v Ravens game. And I think it would be very hard to like, project that game based on how both teams did this season. But my my heart prefers a little bit more of the 49ers, leans more towards the 49ers. So I think this year that the 49ers will win the Super Bowl. All right. Thank you for tuning in on the Teams for Business podcast today as we talk about the past NFL season and give our predictions for the NFL playoffs. And we'll see you next week.